Is the best option for Baylor's starting quarterback next year a little closer than we all think? Maybe. This is Locked On Baylor.
You are Locked On Baylor, your daily podcast on the Baylor Bears, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Thank you for joining us for another episode of Locked On Baylor, brought to you today by Prize Picks. I'm your host, Cam Stewart, and today we're dipping our quarterbacks, our toes into the water of quarterbacks, if you will, for probably the last time. There are some guys who will enter the portal that we'll talk about periodically, but in terms of my targets here, my wish list, probably going to shelve the quarterbacks one after today. We've got some other positions to really get into. Of course, the offensive line is what Baylor needs the most. Wide receiver, I think, is what they need the second most. And there are some good names out in the transfer portal right now. And there's some defensive guys that they have already offered. And they do have some holes on defense, too, as you could probably tell from the 120th defense in the nation. But looking back at the quarterback, so the only offer that we've seen is to Matthew Sluka of Holy Cross, my guy, but we're done talking about him for now. And the other ones that I had targeted and put in yesterday's show, Chandler Morris of North Texas and Taylon Green of Boise State. Morris was a guy who was on Baylor's radar last year when he was leaving the University of Louisiana Monroe and had a great year at UNT. And Taylon Green is one that some of the players are targeting online in a good way, targeting for recruiting purposes. Armani Winfield's high school teammate. Armani looks like he's trying to get him to Baylor. Now, of course, as I said yesterday, all we need now is Armani to say he is coming back to Baylor. Let's look at two more here. And the first one is more of a long shot. Again, neither of these guys have been offered, but could be reasonable targets for Baylor and Jake Spavital going into next season. And the first one is more of a long shot because he doesn't really have any ties down here in Texas, and that is Taquan Finn, the quarterback from Toledo. Okay, again, it's coming off the charts. You're like, Toledo, Cam? Seriously? Yes, seriously. Because in 2023, he led his conference in completion percentage, passing yards, passing touchdowns, and rushing yards by a quarterback. So that would be 62% completion percentage, 63%, 2,657 yards, 22 touchdowns to 9 picks. He's also a 3-year starter. Okay, so in those 3 years, just passing 60.2 completion percentage, 7,000 yards, 63 touchdowns to 7 picks in 3 years. Did I say 7? I meant 23. 23 picks in 3 years. So another one of these guys that's kind of a late bloomer. His numbers, as they probably should be, get better each year. He didn't have any offers out of high school, so no Texas ties there. It was Central Michigan, Air Force, Bowling Green, and Toledo, which is where he ends up going. He does have 2 years of eligibility left, and he is a dual threat guy. So I gave you his passing numbers. I made sure I specified it was just passing because he's rushed for over 500 yards in each of the last 3 years as a starter. So over 1,800 rushing yards in his career and 25 rushing touchdowns. Dual threat. And I talked about Taylon Green being that Cam Newton prototype, that 6'6", 215, I think is about where he's at, 225. So that's what you need to be a tough guy to bring down sometimes. Because Taquan Finn is 6'2" and 205, and if you look at his tape, he is equally as tough to bring down in probably a stronger conference, actually, top to bottom, the MAC to the Mountain West. But we're splitting hairs there. So 2 years of eligibility left. He's a kid comes in with a ton of experience and potential in terms of years as a starter looking ahead of him. That's very rare in the transfer portal. Even with how much eligibility these guys left, that's still pretty rare, especially for a school like Baylor to be able to go out and get. Now, I am guessing he's a Detroit native. Michigan needs a quarterback next year from what's coming out of their camp, but I imagine he will be in the Big Ten. Michigan State also is under a new regime. They've already offered Matthew Sluka as well, so clearly they're looking quarterback. I think he'll stay in the Big Ten, but if somehow Baylor could pull this off, this is one of those kids who, mid-major, group of 5 guy, but can work in about any offense that Jake Spavital is going to run, just from what I see, because of that dual threat ability, because he makes all the throws. He's the only one of, I think it was 5 quarterbacks in FBS, 6 quarterbacks in FBS with 2,000 passing yards and 500 rushing yards this year. Okay. Only 6 of them in all of these 133 teams. And one of them was at Toledo, and he's on the market. So some Big Ten team is going to be really happy with DeQuan Finn. If by some divine miracle Baylor goes and gets him, that would be big time. And as much as I do like Sawyer Robertson and his potential, if they were able to get some guy like Finn, I think that's your starting quarterback, personally. Now, looking at a more reasonable, quote unquote, option because of the Texas ties is another very much group of 5 quarterback, Braden Shager from Hawaii. He had a monster year this year for a not good Hawaii team. 63% completion percentage, 3,542 yards. Let me repeat that. 3,542 yards. That was 10th in all of FBS at Hawaii. 26 touchdowns, 14 picks, throwing the ball around a lot, and about 7 yards of completion. I'm going to come back to that figure there. So 10th nationally in passing yards. Now, Hawaii was trailing in a lot of games, so that's why they had to throw it around a lot. That's why he probably threw it into traffic quite a bit. So not trying to make excuses here, but maybe some more context to the numbers there. And he does have Texas ties. He is a Highland Park Scotty. He was the backup there for a couple of years. His senior year was when he got to start because he was playing behind TCU great, Baylor killer, Arkansas great, Chandler Morris. Talk about that quarterback room in high school. And Braden Shager's putting up better numbers than Chandler Morris did in college. Now, he's not the biggest kid in the world. He's about 6 feet. And he throws for about 7 yards of completion. So that's not bad. None of those things are bad. But I'm saying in terms of an expectation, that's a lot more like Blake Shapen or Charlie Brewer than really anyone I've talked about on this list. Even more so than Chandler Rogers, who fits the build well, but has a little bit more zip on the fastball. Now, an interesting note about this is he might not love the offensive line that Baylor has out there, because I think one of the big reasons why he's leaving Hawaii, first, for a better opportunity, but second, because they are letting him die out there. They are killing him. His offensive line is murdering him out there. He was sacked 39 times this year. 39 times. Baylor allowed all of their quarterbacks to get sacked 34 times. It was the worst in the Big 12, comfortably the worst in the Big 12. This poor kid, man. He's not the biggest guy in the world. He must love a good ice bath now. Sacked 39 times. And that was just 13 times in 2022. So clearly a new line in there. And the boy was running for his life, and he's still ranked top 10 in passing yards. Now, an interesting note as well. He was recruited to Hawaii by offensive coordinator Gary Joe Kinney Jr. GJ Kinney, now the head coach, obviously, at Texas State, one that some Baylor fans are clamoring for to be the head coach at Baylor this next season. 1-0 against Baylor in his career now. He didn't stay at Hawaii, GJ Kinney. He recruited Shager, and then Shager was there before, or Kinney had left before Shager even went to campus. So Shager stuck around there 3 years, which is more than he had as a starter in high school and the winningest high school football program in all of Texas. So this is, I think, would be a great fit. Now, I imagine Texas State is probably hitting his line pretty good here. I think this is someone that Kinney's probably going to target as well. But who knows? Maybe that means he's your quarterback at Baylor in 2025 and follows his coach there. We'll see. But I think he's actually one of the slept on guys that's in the transfer portal. We haven't seen much about offers yet. He just went in the portal yesterday, or late Wednesday. And so the offers, we haven't seen how public that is, but he should get some interest from Baylor and should get some interest from some pretty good Power 5 teams. I think he's ready to make that step up from the numbers he puts out. He's getting a little too big for Hawaii. So that's an interesting one to keep an eye out on. Again, only Sluka has the offer, but Braden Shager got me thinking about someone else who might be a quarterback option for the Bears that might be a little bit more familiar than we think. But first, I got to tell you about how today's episode is brought to you by Prize Picks, okay? Now you've got basketball season. You can overlap in all of these sports, whether it be basketball, football, or down to the other leagues, college basketball. Obviously, college football is still around. And the NHL, if you're like me. And you can put all bets on all of these different games, and you could do combo projections with it too. So what I mean by combo projections is you're watching the NFL and the NBA on the same day. You can do like a Jason Tatum plus Travis Kelce, 9.5 catches plus 3-pointers. And you can be locked into both these games and win some money off it. Meek Mill does it too. And you can see his plays under the community tabs and see what he's playing today. Now, my favorite part is the reboot policy that Prize Picks does. Nobody else does it. Okay, so if you have a player leave injured in the first or second quarter, they don't come back. That player gets rebooted. Okay, and they are the only ones with that kind of injury insurance policy. So it is absolutely the best time to go over to Prize Picks. And if that doesn't convince you, you can go ahead and do this. You can go to prizepicks.com/lockedoncollege and use the code LOCKEDONCollege for a first deposit match up to $100. That's prizepicks.com/lockedoncollege, and then use the code LOCKEDONCollege for a first deposit match up to $100. Thank you to Prize Picks for sponsoring today's video. So back to the quarterbacks here one last time, I think. And I looked specifically at Braden Shager yesterday. I looked at his numbers and I said, man, yeah, he does fit that mold of the Charlie Brewer or the Blake Shapen. For as much as Baylor fans might hate hearing that, those are two guys who were fairly successful at Baylor, especially Charlie Brewer. And I think, man, could these guys play in this Spavital offense? Spavital wanted Blake Shapen to come back, and then I thought, well, wait, Shapen's in the transfer portal, but is he still an option here? Because you got to imagine he's gotten some offers, and if they were big enough offers, he probably would have posted about them. But he's someone that Spavital has talked to. And what it sounded like in his introductory press conference, Spavital, it sounded like that this was not a ship that has sailed for Blake Shapen. And Blake put out this cryptic post on, was it Wednesday, maybe Tuesday, of him and his teammates like coming out of the tunnel. It was all in black and white, no caption to it, just leaving us hanging again. And yet we're almost at the end of the week here. I mean, we are as you're listening to this, but looking at the offers, we haven't heard anything for Blake Shapen. So could he still come back? I think it's an option. And if you're Blake Shapen, do you want to come back? Personally, I thought he was going to get some good offers, and we just still haven't heard about that yet. And if I were Blake, I would probably go somewhere else. Not because he doesn't love Baylor, not because he's not good enough to play at Baylor anymore. That's not the case at all. But I think if I'm Blake, I'm just thinking, why don't I go somewhere else that runs more of a different kind of pro style offense than Jake Spavital is going to run, a pro style offense, but that plays to my strengths, whereas I don't know if Spavital's will, but he's been able to adjust quite a bit. And let's see if we can improve any kind of professional football draft stock here in the next 2 years, and play at one that has better resources around me, in that it has an offensive line, it has outside receivers who get open, It has a complementary defense. All of those things are on the Christmas wish list for Blake Shapen. And right now, that's not what they have at Baylor. And if he looks at the situation here and sees that all of the guys from last year are recommitting, I don't know if that entices him either. Not that he doesn't like these guys, but these are the guys who were around him when he was getting beat to hell and they were going 3-9. So if Shapen was able to see some, top receivers or really good offensive linemen saying, hey, I'm getting offered by Baylor or committing to Baylor out of the transfer portal, then that might change his mind. But right now, it's the same team that went 3-9 with him. It's a different scheme. Yeah, and us as fans are optimistic that's going to change some things around. I personally am optimistic that's going to change some things around. But if you're Blake Shapen, you're like, well, that's a risk I don't really want to take here. That's a risk I don't want to take a whole year of my eligibility to take, a whole year of my mental and physical health to take. Again, they gave up more sacks than anybody in the Big 12. And not all 34 were sacking Blake Shapen because a couple of those other 25 knocked him out of a couple of games. He missed at least 3 games early in the season and then missed another one in the last week of the season because he was taking so many hits. I think that's probably what Blake thinks about when he enters the transfer portal. And while he might love Baylor and love the guys around him, I think he's thinking about those hits a little bit more. I really do. And I can't blame him for that. So I think Spavital is going to run a really good offense at Baylor. I do. But I don't know that Shapen's going to be the guy at quarterback. Now, that said, I also kind of hinted at this earlier. I think Spavital is so adaptable that he would be able to run a good offense for someone like Blake Shapen. But I personally think he would prefer the skill set of somebody like Sawyer Robertson, who obviously doesn't have the experience and doesn't have the acumen and what Blake Shapen has accomplished. And I know some of you are yelling at the screen right now, but yes, Blake Shapen's accomplishments, like stepping in at the end of a championship season with no room for error and not erroring, winning a couple of games for you, and then having a great Big 12 championship game MVP performance. How quick we are to forget that. And then beating out the guy who was the starter for most of the year, that Sugar Bowl team, the next year in the quarterback competition. So yeah, he accomplished. And I don't know that obviously Sawyer hasn't accomplished that yet, but I do think his build, his skill set, his type of football is more conducive to the spread offense and to what Jake Spavital is going to run than what Blake Shapen gives you. That said, it sounds like I'm talking out of both corners, but I think Sawyer is probably the better choice for Spavital. But that said, I still like Blake Shapen. Like, I think Blake Shapen could come in here and have a good statistical season. I don't know if either of those quarterbacks right now with the personnel around them, I don't know if either of them get them to a bowl game just because of all that's around them. But I think Blake Shapen proved a lot of people wrong this year. It wasn't just gutsy, but effective, although he was really gutsy, but also effective and took care of the football. I think that's someone you would welcome back if he wants to come back. But again, from Blake's side, I don't think so. But please, actually, let me know what you think. Is there a part of this I'm missing here that could be a good reason for Blake to come back or a great reason for Blake to stay away? Let me know down in the comments below. But first, I'm going to throw a couple words at you before we get into the next segment. Passion, drive, and patience. What brings home the winning trophy is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. From superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has got you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay's Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time. or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber. You're not burning cash. So with all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to turn your car into the Heisman Trophy winner and bring home that win. So enjoy your ride or die, or keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only, exclusions apply. eBay guaranteed fit, only available to customers in the US of A. Shifting gears to basketball. Now, no, I'm not previewing any game of this weekend. The women don't play until the 14th. The men don't play until the 16th. So we've got a long time without Baylor basketball as the students go through finals, which sucks. So going to be a lot of portal talk next week, quite a bit. So get used to it. But I do want to take a moment for basketball because there's been so much chaos in football in this young offseason that I don't think I've been able to give it the credit that I want, nor that they deserve. But Baylor is the only school in the nation right now, and I know you've heard this, but it's worth repeating. The only school in the nation right now with 2 top 10 basketball programs. UConn doesn't have that. Duke doesn't have that. Doesn't have either. Carolina, Tennessee, none of them have that. LSU, no. Baylor, that's the only one with top 10 men's and women's basketball. Texas doesn't have that. How about those Longhorns, by the way? Woo. Shaka. Oh, you went up to Milwaukee in December and lost embarrassingly to a very good Marquette team. Baylor wouldn't know that feeling. It's only been 12 months since that happened. Welcome to our world, baby. And if Texas is going to be like 2023 Baylor, heck yeah, baby. Bring that on. Anyway, good for Shaka. Always like Shaka. Always thought he'd get a raw deal at Texas. Love it when he sticks it to them. But they don't have 2 top 10 basketball teams. At the end of this week, they probably won't have any. But Baylor does. And I'm going to get meta in this point because we don't have a game to preview or anything like that. But the women, obviously, 3 national championships. The men with a national championship in 2021. And with a great team this year, I think, on paper, that could make a deep run. But it's still early. Can't jump to those conclusions yet. And they're both moving into this gorgeous new pavilion that I love to drive by every day. That's going to open next month in early December. And so all of that being said, with the mega success that both programs have had, the elite status that Baylor men's have had in the last 5 years, and the way Nikki Collin is bringing the women's team back to that next level, back to that elite status, to me shows that Baylor has all the pieces in place on the court and in the coach's office to become one of these like truly elite blue blood basketball programs, at least in terms of a culture. Now, stick with me here because you're going to be crying, yelling, throwing up when you hear this, but stick with me. At this point, with the talent that Baylor brings in, year out, and the results they put out there in the best conference in America, culturally, not accomplishments-wise, but culturally, they should be like a Duke. When you think of Duke, you think elite basketball. That's the first thing you think of. Of course, elite academics, sure. But elite basketball is the first thing you think of. You think of Cameron Indoor, you think of Coach K, you think of Christian Laettner, you think of national championships, you think of insufferable fans, of which I was one for a long time. That's what you think about. And so when I present to you Baylor's success this year, they're not going to have the championship banners yet. Hopefully those come. But right now, they have got an incredible basketball team, an incredible basketball coach, and they don't have the crazies, but they're also a small private school. They're struggling in football. So all of those things put together should be culturally what you think about Duke. Now, maybe a more reasonable one would be looking at like a Georgetown or Villanova, who does have championship banners as well. But, I mean, Georgetown hasn't been good at basketball in years. But when you think Georgetown, you think basketball. At least as a sports fan, that's what you think. And yet, when you think Baylor around the country, you think that's a football school. They're in Texas. Because it's not cool to talk about Baylor basketball yet. It's cooler than it used to be. Sure. But again, the point I made in yesterday's show, you go to a Baylor home game and they're top 10 in the nation and there's 6,000 people there. That doesn't happen at Duke. They have 9,000 people there, but it's punching the place out. It's the best environment in college basketball. So why is Baylor not? I mean, Villanova is another example. They're on a scuffle right now. They've lost 3 in a row. They just lost to Jerome Tang's Kansas State team. By the way, the chaos going off at Kansas State under Tang. Oh boy. But looking at the environment that Villanova puts out, or that Georgetown used to put out, and there's just no reason for Baylor to not have that all-around culture in basketball to be talked about like some of the Blue Bloods are. They're good enough on the court, but yet I think people would think of even a Kansas State or an Iowa State as more of a Blue Blood than Baylor, even though they don't have the national championship banners, because they have a fervent fandom around them. That's the only reason why. Baylor is a better basketball team. They're a better basketball program than those schools that I talked about yesterday as well, Kansas State and Iowa State. But they punch out the arena every game. It feels like a basketball environment. And right now, Baylor's just not quite there as much as I want it to be. I so want it to be. Honestly, I like college basketball even more than college football. So I would love for Baylor to be like this true out and out blue blood, new blood, whatever you want to call them, but on that same pedestal, at least culturally, again, not championships wise, that you put a Baylor a Duke or a UConn. It's a school that's fairly similar in size, but has 5 national championships. So they need to get up to that level in terms of the banners and that success. But in terms of what you think about when you think about Baylor, there's no reason right now with the product that they have out there, with the pavilion that they're going to have, to not think basketball right away. And the only thing that's, I think, holding them back right now is, again, not having great fan support. So let me know what you think. Can Baylor ever be amongst that conversation of Duke and UConn and maybe not the bluest of the blue, the Kentuckys and the Kansases, but can they be up there in that discussion? Let me know down in the comments. Be sure to like and subscribe to the channel. Really appreciate you guys tuning in every day. Again, we're the only place that's giving you 5 days a week of strictly Baylor athletics content, not coming from Baylor University. So appreciate you guys. Be sure to like, subscribe, share with your friends. Leave a comment down below. It always helps the algorithm. And we will be back next week. Have a good weekend from all of us here at Locked On Baylor.